We're so fortunate in Alberta and in the prairies to have the Rocky Mountains, because most of the prairies are semi-arid to subhumid, and pretty well almost all the rain and snow that falls evaporates back up to the atmosphere through plant growth or something else. But in the mountains we get heavier precipitation, and those mountain headwaters can have 10 times as much precip as out in the prairies, and there's enough excess that it forms stream flow. And that stream flow then provides a water source that flows out in our rivers from the mountains through the eastern slopes and the foothills across the prairies right to Manitoba. The seasonal snowpack in the Canadian Rockies and the foothills provides the equivalent of an incredible system of reservoirs that we've never had to build. We can have several dry months over the winter, but as long as it snowed in December or earlier on, or maybe snowed later, then we can often have a normal snowpack, which provides for reliable stream flow. So it provides incredible reliability, which we've taken advantage of for our municipal supplies, further south in Alberta for irrigation, and then also the ecosystem is very dependent upon that. So with the climate shifting and water resources changing, that poses tremendous challenges for society and for our natural environment that we depend upon. And so we're going to a system that will have much less predictability, greater flashiness, and a possibility of longer droughts, as well as when that rain comes, the indications are it will come more intensively and over longer periods of time, so tend to come in conditions that may sometimes generate floods. So that's a big shift for us. It would be a big shift in how we manage our water and how we use our water and what our expectations of reasonable water use are. So the parameters of water security change in the latter part of the century, and it's not in a good way.
So climate change is already influencing the Red Deer watershed and is going to continue to do so as the Earth continues to warm. What we're starting to see in the literature and in the data that's being reported by the Water Survey of Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada is that we're seeing shifting conditions. We're starting to see earlier snowmelts. We're starting to see earlier freshets. We're starting to see more compressed flow in an earlier part of the year and a longer low flow period. So when we're thinking about how we're managing our rivers and how we've managed them in the past, we have to think about how that's going to change in the future, because really the status quo is not working. We need to actually realize that things are shifting and be able to adjust accordingly to that.
A lot of results talk about the average, the average climate getting warmer, the average climate getting wetter, average stream flow going up. That all looks fine, but 2013 was $6 billion of damage in southern Alberta. In an average year, it would have been a drought year except for 3 days of heavy rainfall in June of 2013. If those days hadn't occurred, that would have been a drought year. So you can have a drought and a flood at the same time. They produce an average year, but the damages are incredible. Another average year was 2019, last year. Started with a drought, ended with a very wet period. Some of the worst harvests for grain in prairie history in the last 40 years. Again, on average, it was average. So we have to look at the sequence of when these wet periods and dry periods occur, and then we have to make sure that those averages don't mean that we have a drought with a flood in the middle of it, back to normal, because both of those extremes are really difficult to manage and so very destructive.
Well, where we're at, sometimes it forgets to rain for an entire year, and we can't hold that against anybody. We choose to live there. But yeah, we feel like we're kind of the survivors of the pioneering time. The area itself where I'm at, there was 38 municipalities, got folded into one. The Dirty 30s were very hard on the farming practices of the day. So the last 80 years has been, that rehabilitation and learning to live within the land on a farming or cattle or a human basis. I think you have to plan in the wet years. It's really impossible to get anything done in the dry part of the cycle. So you have to know that it's always up around the bend, and yeah, just the cyclical nature. We have to prepare, and with technology, we're so much more efficient as far as transferring water and then what we do with it once it gets there. Exponentially better than just years ago. And what I was led to believe by the smartest people in the room was that, you know, there's potential for more moisture in this area, but more heat. So it's probably going to be more vast differences in how both of those get to us. So I think just being prepared for bigger amplifications and seasonal changes, and I think we're prepared from what we've learned in the past to deal with the future.
We have a great tradition in Western Canada of finding solutions. We managed to settle and farm in a part of the world that in the 1800s people weren't certain that anyone should try to farm in. So solutions can be found, but they will sometimes be expensive, and there are going to be great challenges in implementing these for sure.
We, as a water-constrained basin, that is even more of a challenge to us in the future, to recognize that we can't sit and just enjoy. We have to take active measures to work together as 3 levels of governments, municipal, provincial, and federal, and try to make sure that, knowing that there may be these ups and downs of water use in the future, knowing there may be high water events, there may also be droughts. There is climate change. We can't be deniers. We need to manage for our future generations this precious resource in a fashion that is using the best of our technology, the best of our science.
We tend to judge what's going to happen by what happened in the past. Now, that's not unreasonable. If you know historically you've had multi-year droughts, accept that that's probably going to happen again. I think if anything, the current pandemic shows us we weren't prepared for a worldwide pandemic that would totally disrupt our way of life, our economy, our social interactions. We weren't ready. It's not really different for the watershed. If we had a major change in it, for whatever reason, changing climate, changing use, a sudden upsurge in demand for the water, or conversely, inappropriate other uses where you're taking a lot out and not returning it. The long-term implications can be enormous, and the more brittle we make ourselves, the less likely we're going to be able to be flexible and change and adapt to that in the future. That's our biggest challenge, making sure we have all the factors in mind, that we have good data-based evidence of what we're dealing with, and to plan as much as we can. There's still going to be the big surprise, such as a worldwide virus nobody expected. But that doesn't mean to say it can't come from something else that we're just not prepared for. The most efficient way of dealing with things is prevention, pre-planning, dealing with issues when they're relatively cheap so they don't become bigger, more expensive problems later. The problem that we have, though, is when you're in a time of economic shortfall, as we are in now, some of the easiest programs to cut are the ones that you don't see the immediate benefit of. They're an investment way down the road, and just if you're in private enterprise industry, you know that often when you make an investment or plant a tree, you're not going to immediately see the benefits. But when we cut that out, and the pressures currently are just enormous to do that sometimes where we might save something here will cause us vast amounts later. And if we are having struggles paying for it now, we can't just presume that soon the wonderful abundance will be back and we won't have to worry we can catch up. Maybe the long-term economic struggles, maybe the fundamental changes with the way societies and our economies are working, maybe we won't have that ability. when you talk about changes of what's happened in this part of the world with the city of Red Deer or the Red Deer River watershed, we have to remember the phenomenal rate of change that has already happened. You have to think regionally, you have to think in the long term.